Okay, where is it? No, not that. No, not that. Okay, no, I don't have time. I have to go. Okay, hey everybody. All right. So, hi everybody, how you doing? Big news today with this one, everybody. Big news. All right, we got a new SBS, and I am not kidding around when I'm telling you right there. I am telling you, okay? This may be the most important SBS in the history of One Piece. Okay? Normally with SBS, there's tiers of SBS. There's hierarchies of SBS. There's SBSs that don't usually have that many important ones, like questions, like who cares? And then there's like, okay, maybe one or two really important questions. And then there's a few that are like, okay, these are really important. This is an SBS where I am not kidding. Every single question that Oda answers is integral for the character development, for the world building of this story, okay? Pokemon is now canon in the One Piece world, and I am not kidding, all right? So, we gotta get into it. We gotta get into it. Cody goes over there, straw hat, okay. We're gonna go step by step here. You should go get snacks, okay? I'm gonna take a moment to take a breath and just assess my life in general and get organized. So you guys go get snacks, I'll get set up here, and then when you come back, I will tell you the story of how Zoro's grandparents met each other. This is gonna be so much fun. Okay. Got Ace's beads. All right, has everybody got their snacks? Everybody have everything ready to go? Okay, I think I'm set. I look like a wayward otaku tourist. If I ever visit Japan, I'm wearing exactly this, walking around Tokyo. Okay, so, yeah, I wanted to thank Artur, of course, over at the Library of Ohara for the translations. Links to all his stuff is below, but we got to get into this, man. We have a lot of stuff to discover and discuss today. We're discovering it, and we're discussing it at the same time, all right? And I'm just going to start off with what I deem as the most important. I mean, I would love to discuss how the Pokemon universe works in One Piece, but, I wonder how many Pokemon they have. Okay, we'll get to it. First, we got to start, though, with Zoro's family tree. All right, so Zoro's family tree was just revealed. Like, Oda just drew the whole thing. We know the names of Zoro's parents. We know at least the name of Zoro's grandmother, his grand uncle. We know his grand uncle, which you might think that's not really that important, but it is. We know about Zoro's connection to the Shimosuke. All that stuff was revealed in this SBS. And I should say right out of the gate, a lot of people were kind of put off by that. Not that we were getting this information, but that we were getting it in an SBS pretty much confirms that we're not really going to address it all that much in the story. But I don't think that should really surprise anybody because Oda even said, like, way back while we were still, like, I think in Act 1 of Wano, that, there was a story involving Zoro, but it's not something he was ever really going to put in the main manga, like in the, like in the weekly chapters. It was just a little side thing, and I think the way that Oda specified it was, if there's time in Wano for me to fit it in, if I can find a place to, explain Zoro's lineage and his parents and everything in the backstory, I'll put it in, but it wasn't anything that he was really, like, aiming to, include. Like, you have to know this information or else Wano falls apart. Honestly, what I think it was, we're in Onigashima. Most of the final battle takes place. It's fast-paced. A lot of stuff's going on. Yeah, Zoro fought against King, but, like, we already had that flashback with Kozaburo there that took up, like, half of a chapter. So, I mean, Oda, I would have been okay if he took a whole chapter or two out to explain this, but, like, I could see why Oda didn't, was what I'm getting across here. I can see why Oda decided, like, all right, I'll just include this in the SBS after the fact. I'm not going to go into huge detail. I'm not going to derail the story for 2 chapters while Zoro's fighting King to explain, how Zoro's grandparents met or whatever. Okay, so here's how the family tree shakes down, all right? So 55 years ago in Wano, all right, we had Kozaburo Shimosuke. Kozaburo is, of course, the famed swordsmith that created both the Wado Ichimonji as well as the Enma. Okay? And we know this because Zoro met him. Zoro met Kozaburo at Shimosuke Village in the east when he was an old man. He explained that, I'm not so great at making swords anymore, but back in my day, I could make swords that could slice mountains apart, And he talked about his famed master sword that he crafted, which was Enma, okay? And he talked a little bit about cursed blades and what they really are and all that stuff. So 55 years ago, Kozaburo crafted the Enma, or rather he finished the Enma, and he gave it as a gift to Oden Kozuki. Now keep in mind, Oden was only 4 years old, and you might say he gave this sword as a gift for when Oden grew up and became the shogun, but also remember at age 4, Oden was throwing boulders and crushing giant grizzly bears with them. So I think at this point, Kozaburo heard the stories of Oden, tossing boulders around, and he's like, I gotta make a sword for that kid. He's going places, right? So he went ahead and crafted Enma, and we also have Ame no Habakiri here, which was also given to Oden at this time. They both appear in the SBS as gifts to 4-year-old Oden. And remember, it was Tenguyama Hitetsu, who we later found out was Sukiyaki. So I guess Sukiyaki was the one that created Ame no Habakiri to give to his son. Makes sense. And then Kozaburo made the Enma and then gave it to Oden, okay? And then I bet Oden at age 4 was just like, yes, I no longer require giant boulders. I shall slice apart grizzly bears with these mighty blades, and then he got set on his fast track to success there, okay? It was also during this same year, 55 years ago, when Kozaburo illegally left Wano with a group of 25 people, himself included. So there were 25 people that illegally left Wano and set sail out into the Grand Line, okay, to find a new home. We still don't exactly know the reason why they left. It might just be because they felt sort of stifled and locked in because of the very strict isolationist policy of Wano. So they decided, hey, we want to get out of there. We want to see the world. We want to set up a home somewhere else on the planet, And they weren't officially allowed to do this, so they had to leave, without telling anybody. I also like to think, and this is getting into headcanon territory, I like to think the reason why Kozaburo made Enma for Oden, and he gave it to Oden the same year he left, was a little bit out of guilt, as sort of like a goodbye, as sort of like, hey, Sukiyaki, I'm sorry for betraying the policies of Wano. I'm sorry for betraying the Kozukis, for leaving the country, but I'm going to do this. I'm going to leave, and I'm taking a group with me. Here's a really cool sword to give to your son, to the future shogun. To sort of make up for that. And so that's at least my headcanon, the way I'm viewing it there. So about this group of 25 individuals that left Wano, we know Kozaburo was probably the leader and the most prominent out of all of them, but there were some other really important people in this group. One of them was Minatomo. Minatomo is the carpenter that we actually see in the East, and he's fixing a random door, and I think Oda mentioned him in an SBS or a data book years and years ago. This was near the beginning of One Piece. Oh yeah, that's the carpenter, Minatomo. He immediately fixes any door he sees. Okay, that all ties back to Wano because a similar carpenter was the the foreman leading the construction crew that Frankie was on at the beginning of Wano. All right, so it's his brother or his dad or somebody, right? Okay, and then another notable individual that left Wano with this group, with Kozaburo, was Furiko Shimosuke. Who is Furiko Shimosuke? She is the older sister of Ushimaru Shimosuke. And also, Furiko is Zoro's grandma. So there you go, right? I mean, we're not even into the family tree really yet, and already it's we know Zoro's grandma, his Mima. That's great. Okay, so, all right, so, Oda came out plenty of times because, everybody wanted Ushimaru to be Zoro's dad because he looks just like him, and the comparisons, old man Hyo was making, his sword technique looks just like Ushimaru's, and Ushimaru was the descendant of Ryuma, and Zoro is a one-eyed swordsman, and Ryuma was a one-eyed swordsman. And so everybody wanted this really badass samurai, the daimyo of Ringo, Ushimaru Shimosuke, to be Zoro's daddy. Okay, unfortunately, he's not Zoro's dad, but even back when Oda confirmed that, I was like, well, the family resemblance is there, guys. So even if he's not Zoro's dad, he's probably his uncle or his grandfather or some kind of relation, and that's true. Shimosuke Ushimaru is Furiko's younger brother, who Furiko is Zoro's grandma, which would make Ushimaru Shimosuke Zoro's grand uncle. I think it's granduncle. I learned how family trees shake down from a CGP Grey video years ago. I think it's not great uncle because I think great uncle is on the same level as your great grandparents, and so your grandma and your granddad, their siblings would be your grand uncles and grand aunts. I think that's how it works. Whatever. But anyway, that's the relationship that Zoro has with Ushimaru. Also connecting the dots to the great ancestor of the sword god, Ryuma. Zoro is related to Ryuma. This fact should shock no one, all right? But there it is, okay? So, that all happened 55 years ago. They left Wano. 52 years ago is when they landed in the East. Probably spent a few years traveling around the globe. I don't think they had the East in mind as their permanent destination. I think it was more of just like leaving Wano and finding some place to settle, and they eventually found their way to the East Blue, all right? Now, this is a story and an epic that I am sure was insane because, you know, traveling from the New World, which borders the North and West Blues, making it either over the Red Line or going through Fishman Island or something, finding your way all the way to the East, that is a saga. That is an epic that would rival the great stories of, like, the Greeks and the Romans, okay? And it took about 3 years, but they eventually reached the East Blue, all right? This is where it connects back to a little bit of a story that we heard, like a part of this story that we learned earlier in another SBS, where Kozaburo Shimosuke and the people of Wano landed in a small village in the east that was being besieged by mountain bandits. So Kozaburo and the rest of the samurai of Wano show up, and, you know, and they cut down the mountain bandits, and they decide to settle in this village, and this village would be given the name Shimosuke Village. This is where Zoro grew up, okay? A couple of things to note, though. Out of the 25 people that left Wano, only 10 of them, including Kozaburo, Minato, well, maybe not Minatomo, because Minatomo, I think, was in the Goa Kingdom, but Furiko and Kozaburo definitely settled in Shimosuke. So that was 10 of them. So, and there was already a village there. Like, it's not like they created the village. The village was already there. They just decided to settle there, and they renamed the village Shimosuke Village. I'm assuming Kozaburo or Furiko became, like, the mayor or the leader or the town head or whatever it is, right? So that leaves 15 other people that, you know, came from Wano that spread about all over the East, I'm assuming. They went to go settle into some other locations. And so this, I mean, Artur even brought this up when he was tweeting this stuff out, but it makes a lot of sense that, okay, that's probably where Tashigi comes from, okay? Probably Tashigi's parents were not from Shimosuke. They were one of those 15 other, well, I guess her grandparents would make more sense, were part of that other group of 15 people from Wano that chose to settle in other locations in the East. All right, which would, of course, lead to Kuina and Tashigi being related, another fact that absolutely nobody should be shocked about, but it is true. All right, so that's probably the situation there, although we don't really know much more about Tashigi. All right, so allowing to continue this story here. All right, so after Kozaburo and Furiko and the other 8 people settle in the village, of course, they begin to mingle. Kozaburo meets a village woman, and they get married, and they have a child. And that child is Koshiro Shimosuke, who was Zoro's mentor, Zoro's sword master at Shimosuke Village that led the dojo, okay, the Ishin Dojo. Then Koshiro meets a woman from the village. We do not know her name. We actually see her a little bit in the Strong World and the animation in Chapter 0. And Koshiro and this village woman get married as well, and they give birth to a child. They have a daughter, and that is Kuina. Okay, so Kuina's name is Kuina Shimosuke, all right? Now, that's Kozaburo. That's Kozaburo Shimosuke's family line. Now, moving over to Furiko Shimosuke's family line, okay? Because they're like parts of like branches of the same family, okay? Because the Shimosuke family, very big, okay? So, moving now over to this other branch here, we have Furiko, who we know Furiko is the older sister of Ushimaru. Furiko meets a man in the village named Zoro. Zoro. That's the name of Zoro's grandpa. At least we know that. That's where the name came from. I was named after my great-grandfather. Zoro was named after his grandfather. Is it that weird? I don't think so. Zoro. Reminds me of, there was a villain in the second One Piece movie, Clockwork Island Adventure, named Pin Joker. So, Pin Joker, Pin Zoro, whatever. Okay. So, it was Furiko Shimosuke gets married to Roronoa Pin Zoro, and then they get married. Obviously, the name Roronoa, that becomes her name, her family name, and then they have a child who is Zoro's father, Roronoa Arashi. Arashi, just meaning storm, like Inu Arashi, okay? Dog storm, just take out the dog and you got Arashi. So Zoro's dad is named Roronoa Arashi. And in case you're curious about are we ever going to meet him? Well, probably not because he's dead. So Oda just confirms right away, Zoro's dad's dead. All right, you want to know about Zoro's dad? Here, his name is Arashi and he's dead. How about that? Okay, cool name though, cool name. So he was actually killed fighting mountain bandits, or no, fighting pirates. So he was fighting pirates. He married a woman that was the daughter of a mountain bandit, okay? I know, interesting family tree, but you can kind of see this with Zoro, right? Okay, so Arashi fought against some pirates and died. We don't know when this happened, okay? We don't know the time frame of any of this happening, after the events of 55 years ago when Kozaburo made the Enma and then left, and then 52 years ago when they settled in the East. All this other stuff, we don't exactly know. We know the ages of some of these characters, so you can kind of back-built it and, look at the timeline and see and everything like that. But anyway, so we don't know, though, how old Zoro was when his dad died, okay? It's actually feasible that, Zoro might have not even have been born yet. Zoro's mom could have been pregnant with him, and then Arashi then fought the pirates and then died, and then Zoro could have been born later. It's possible. I don't think that's the situation, though, because remember, Zoro grew up and the first thing he did was to go be a bounty hunter, okay, to bring in bandits and pirates. So I'm thinking that Zoro did know his father, at least for a little while. He wasn't really in any of the, the flashbacks that we saw. So he might have died when Zoro was really young. And honestly, maybe his mother could have told him the story about his father. Even if Zoro was, let's say, a year old when his father died, when Arashi fought the pirates, when Zoro grew up, his mother could have told him, your father was a brave swordsman and fought against the pirates and died in battle. And maybe Zoro was like, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to fight the pirates, okay? And, Zoro's mom was so happy. By the way, Zoro's mom, I've been calling her Zoro's mom, but she has a name too, and it's Terra. Terra, as in Earth. Terra, I think is the way it's either Tera or Terra, one of the, so that's her name, okay? So that's Zoro's family tree to kind of go over again. And by the way, this is insane because a couple of years ago when we knew a little bit about it, I made this family tree to kind of piece everything together on how Zoro and Kuina were related. And it's not 100% accurate. You can see I tried to put Denjiro in there somewhere, but this was not very far off from what actually happened, so I guess I'll pat myself on the back for that one. Sure, whatever. But anyway, so to recap, Zoro's grandmother is Furiko Shimosuke, who left Wano with Kozaburo 55 years ago. Her little brother is Ushimaru Shimosuke, who was the daimyo of Ringo, who eventually got thrown in the cave with Yamato and the other daimyos. He eventually died. He got killed by Kaido when he rebelled, when he tried to fight back, okay? And then, so she went to the village, Furiko. She met Roronoa Pin Zoro. They got married. They had a child, a son, named Arashi Roronoa. He grew up, he met a woman named Terra. Terra was a daughter of mountain bandits, okay? Now, with daughter of mountain bandits, we don't know if both of Terra's parents were mountain bandits or only her father or only her mother, but they were daughters of mountain bandits. But, she fell in love with Arashi, or they fell in love with each other or whatever, and then they had a child, and then that was Zoro. Arashi died at some point. We don't know the status on Zoro's mom. Zoro's mom might still be alive. Terra might still be alive. And then going over to the other side of it, and by the way, I guess this would make, I don't even know, Zoro and Kuina second cousins twice removed. I don't know, somebody that knows more about family trees, you could look at it, you could tell me how Kuina relates, but there it is. Well, I don't know if we would be able to know 100% because we would have to know the connection between Kozaburo and Furiko, that branch of the family. So we don't know what Kozaburo and Furiko were, if they were cousins or if Kozaburo was Furiko's uncle. I don't think the timelines really work with that. You'd have to figure out that connection in order to make it make sense. But Kuina and Zoro are related in some way because they're all from the Shimosuke family, okay? And so Kozaburo met random woman in the village. They had Koshiro. Koshiro met a random woman in the village. They had Kuina. Kuina died. And then there were 15 other people that, spread all over the East that were from Wano. That's probably where Tashigi's line came from and all that kind of jazz, right? So... Whew. There it is. Are we going to find out anything more about them? I don't know. The anime might do something, and maybe some data books, Fan fiction, definitely. Somebody is probably already writing their fan fiction on how Arashi and Terra met and how Zoro was born. Somebody's probably already on it, Tekking, already on it. But there you go. There are the names. If you wanted to know Zoro's dad's name, we don't know what he looks like, but we have a silhouette of him, and his name was Arashi, which is a really cool name. And then he's named his son Zoro after his own father, Pin Zoro. And so that's where the name Zoro comes from. Or I guess in the, I wonder if in the Viz translation they're going to change it from Pin Zoro to Pin Zolo. And then, his name was you were named after your grandfather, the great Pin Zolo. It's yes, Zolo. All right. So, yeah, there it is. That's Zoro's family tree. I feel like every single one of these discussion points could be like a 20-minute video on its own, but let's keep going. All right, so moving on from Zoro's family tree, we're now getting to Otama's family tree, all right? Now, this was something that some very astute people that have magnifying glass that can actually look at the chapter in high detail probably noticed. So I think it was in chapter 1050 something, 1051, 1052. We see a flashback of Otama, okay? Otama and her hardships in her life growing up in Amagasa Village in the Kuri region of Wano under the thumb of Orochi. It wasn't a really nice situation to live in, okay? We got to see Otama's parents discussing how some people recently died in the mines, so they're probably going to have to go to the mines soon. And so they went to Otama and tried to tell her. Otama was 4 at the time. Mommy and daddy have to go and, work in the mines here. We're going to leave you with, I guess, Tenguyama, I suppose, somebody. And so her parents left, and we get a little bit of a time skip to the future of Otama and Komachiyo at her parents' graves. So they both died in the mines is the implication. And we see their grave markers, and people kind of really examine those grave markers, and you could see that Otama's parents were members of the Kurozumi clan, which of course makes Otama's full name Otama Kurozumi, all right? So that alone was a very popular theory, but that's not the whole thing. Because then we're addressing the performance that Hiyori gave at the very end of Wano, which was in the last chapter of Wano, chapter 1057. Oda pretty much wanted that scene to bookend the entire Wano arc because it's structured like a kabuki play. And so the curtain falls as Hiyori Kozuki gives the final performance as, Komurasaki essentially. And that of course was the play, the Rakugo production. I think it was a form of Rakugo. I've been reading a lot of Akane Banashi, and the form of Rakugo there was a man standing up and narrating it as Hiyori was also talking and dancing and performing. So I'm not sure if it was a form of Rakugo. It might have just been another type of play. But anyway, you had the narrator essentially going through the whole story of the Wano arc. The story of the 9 red scabbards and how they returned to slay the evil Orochi, and the dragon god Kaido, and Momonosuke became the shogun, and all that kind of stuff. And that production, that play ended with Hiyori Kozuki taking out the fan and being Kurozumi, we're born to burn! And then that was the big epic finale to the Wano arc, and then the curtain closes on that end of the chapter, end of Wano, right? So a lot of people now in the Japanese, it was a lot more directed at Orochi. It was very clearly instead of saying Kurozumi was born to burn, which is a flip, it's a turn of phrase on Odin's famous catchphrase, which Odin's catchphrase was, I was born to boil, because his name was Odin, and that's a type of food, and he was boiled alive in oil, so he was born to boil, right? That was Odin. So Kurozumi translates to black charcoal in Japanese, so Hiyori was taking that and being okay, Odin was born to boil, but Kurozumi was born to burn, because you burn charcoal as fuel, okay? So in Japanese, when she says Kurozumi was born to burn, it was intended to just be directed at Orochi. She might as well have said Orochi was born to burn, So not the Kurozumi clan in general. However, a lot of people, this was a big thing that was brought up. I don't think I ever made a direct video about this, but we could talk about it now. A lot of people were kind of upset by this line. They felt that it sort of continues that vicious cycle because you got to remember this kind of all started when Orochi's grandfather poisoned those daimyo like 80 years ago. And then he was found out, and then he was executed. But not only was he executed, all of the Kurozumi clan were essentially blacklisted in Wano. They were the untouchables, essentially. They had everything stripped from them. They had their money, their status, their homes, even their basic rights to freedom basically taken away. And this started like the Kurozumi hunts, where, you know, citizens of Wano would just travel, and just like anybody that I guess had purple hair, or anybody that even looked like a Kurozumi would be rounded up and killed. And it was through that persecution that Orochi was, you know, born into this. He had nothing to do with what his grandfather did. Higurashi and Semimaru explained to him the story, and that's why Orochi has his ultimate goal, which is just to burn all of Wano to the ground, just to ruin it. So Orochi is a bad guy, but through that, you can at least see how he ended up like that, okay? So it's like, when Hiyori does that speech and she ends it with, Kurozumi was meant to burn, a lot of people were like, well, isn't that just reigniting the flames? It's just continuing the cycle? And Oda confirms that she was definitely not referring to, like, Otama there. Like, clearly Hiyori, if Hiyori does find out, or if she already knew that Otama was a Kurozumi, obviously she wasn't referring to all of the Kurozumis and Otama. She was clearly just referring specifically to Orochi. However, Oda also says that, like, now we all know what would happen, like, if Momonosuke or Hiyori or the Scabbards found out that Otama was a Kurozumi. They would not care. They would accept her wholeheartedly, okay? Because they're her friend, you know? But what about other people in Wano? How would the other citizens of Wano react to not just Otama being a Kurozumi, but also other Kurozumi clan members that are still alive in Wano? How would they respond to that? And Oda says something along the lines of, like, well, this is a big problem even in today's society. This is a major issue, and how you are viewed in society based upon your lineage, based upon your family name alone. And you can look at like through history, you know, where it's like just being born into a certain family, people were going to judge you for that, okay? So my logic on this is, it's not so much that play where, you know, Hiyori says that. It's more of the issue of Orochi was a horrible despot that ruled over this country with an iron fist and, like, poisoned the populace, both, like, you know, by deforesting and then polluting the water, but also directly poisoning people with smiles, permanently altering their physiology, not being able to express their own emotions. And there's actually a question revolving around the smiles later, so we'll get to that. But, you know, Orochi was a horrible person, all right? And, oh, by the way, just to also qualify even more, like if it had to be qualified on how horrible Orochi was as an individual, Otama was a Kurozumi. And her parents were Kurozumi. They didn't have any special privileges. They were peasants, just like everybody else. So that really just goes to show right there, Orochi did not give a shit about anybody except himself, not even his own family. He did not care. There's a question that I brought up, like, how come Orochi doesn't have any kids? That would be like, I am Lord Orochi's son. I am Prince Orochi, and I will take over Wano after my father. No, here's the thing. Orochi, this was his goal. He did not want to create a Kurozumi dynasty like the Kozuki dynasty. No, his goal was literally to become the shogun, which he achieved, and then run Wano into the dirt. And I can imagine if Orochi lived to the ripe old age of like 100 and he was about to die, the last thing he would have done is ordered all of Wano like burned to the ground or something like that. Like that's the kind of shit Orochi did. He had no interest in like, I will have children and then my children will rule over Wano and then their children after them and then it'll just be like the Kozukis except we will be in charge. It was none of that. He didn't give a crap about his own family. He didn't care. Okay? It was just all about him. In fact, I could see because Orochi was the, you know, we see him, you know, with like the harem and everything like that. You know, there was probably some children of Orochi, but it's like a situation like in Game of Thrones, like they're bastard children or something. Like a woman in the palace is like, Lord Orochi, I have your child. And Orochi would be like, away with you, cast her into the Curry region. And it's just like, and that's probably what happened. So there probably is children of Orochi. I don't think Otama is like Orochi's granddaughter or anything like that. I don't think she's like a direct descendant of Orochi or anything. I just don't think the timelines match up for that, because Otama and her parents would have to, I don't think it would work. But obviously they are related. They're all part of the same clan, and there probably is like children, like bastard children of Orochi out there somewhere in Wano, right? It's just Orochi wanted nothing to do with them because he wasn't trying to build up, like his kids or his kids' kids. He didn't care. It was all going to be burned at the end, okay? And so thankfully he was stopped. But so after dealing with 20 plus years of that, there's going to be some prejudice against the Kurozumi family still. Like, that's going to exist, okay? So Momo is going to have to be very careful about that stuff. Momonosuke is going to have to, if that ever happens, where, let's say, Kinemon goes to Momonosuke, and it's like, Lord Momonosuke, in the Curry region, a bunch of citizens are getting together to go and capture a Kurozumi family. Momonosuke better quash that immediately, because if he doesn't, if he's like, oh, send the scabbard, Kinemon, send Denjiro, send Kawamatsu, send Inuarashi, send them out to Curry, tell them to stop that immediately. I will not have anybody persecuted in my country anymore. You gotta do that quick. You gotta start that, Momonosuke, because if he doesn't, it is gonna be the vicious cycle all over again. And I think that is whether or not Hiyori did that speech at the end. Like, Kurozumi was meant to burn. Whether or not she said that, there are going to be a lot of citizens of Wano that hate Orochi, and now that Orochi's dead, they're going to direct that hatred to the Kurozumi family. So yeah, Hiyori and Kinemon and Momonosuke might not care if Otama is a Kurozumi, but if some random people in Wano found out that Otama was a Kurozumi, it might not be good for her. So Momonosuke is going to have to address that, all right? But deals with a lot of, that's the kind of stuff in One Piece where, you look at it and you could obviously see parallels to the real world here throughout history and stuff. And, if you look at the subtext of One Piece a lot, Oda doesn't, he has to pull some punches because it is a shonen manga in a magazine with a specific demographic, so he can't just go overtly with everything. But a lot of the topics he covers is, very, very serious in nature, okay? So that is the deal with Otama's family tree right there. So actually, I was going to save this for later, but I'll just say it now because I brought it up. The situation with the smiles. Okay, so there was a question regarding if, hey, I feel really bad for the citizens of Wano because they were permanently altered and they can't do anything but laugh because of the defective smiles that Orochi fed them. Oda-sensei, please have Chopper cure them before he leaves, okay? And Oda says, yeah, sure. And so now all of the, smile users in Wano are now cured and they're perfectly happy and fine. No, that's not what happens. Okay, Oda comes out and says, Chopper is unable to do that. Chopper does not have the medical knowledge or the medicine capable of reversing those effects. But the people of Wano, they can push through. They're tough. They can work their way through the best as they can. You know what I mean? He could have easily just like, oh yeah, Chopper and Law, they worked together and they found the cure. It's like, no, there was no cure. There was no cure. Their bodies were permanently changed by the effects of those defective smiles. Chopper might have examined them, and maybe Law as well. Maybe he examined them, but they just couldn't figure out. That is something that's beyond just medicine at that point. That honestly is more into the realm of like brain surgery. I talked about this a while ago in a video talking about like the smiles and how you could possibly reverse the effects. If anything, it would be brain surgery, so more of Law's camp rather than Chopper's. Really, the only people in all of One Piece that I could even see in the future, like if they focused on it and studied it and tried to figure out a way to reverse the effects of the smiles, maybe Law. If Law really dedicated his life to figuring this out with the op fruit and he's the master surgeon. Dr. Kureha, I think, would have a solid chance if she studied it with all her wealth of medical knowledge. And Dr. Vegapunk, if Dr. Vegapunk put his mind to it, his giant bulbous mind to it, maybe he could figure out a way to cure the smile users, but not Chopper. Chopper's never seen anything like this before. He's not just going to be able to whip up I'll just take some herbs from the forest and mix them together. Here you go, you're cured. That would be way too easy, and that would undercut the whole issue with it, okay? So yeah, Oda every once in a while will be like, hey guys, remember Pound? You know how Pound was dead? Well, he's alive and happy, and he's attending his daughter's wedding. That's great. So, that happens every once in a while, but in this case, Oda kind of put his foot down, and I have to kind of respect him for that and just be like, I'm not just going to snap my fingers and be like, oh no, the smile fruits were, their effects were reversed. It's fine. Chopper and Law worked together, and they did it. I'm not saying it's impossible. He didn't say it was impossible. He just says Chopper doesn't have access to that technology, that medicine, okay? So, yeah, I'm thinking brain surgery or something else involving removing the power of a devil fruit from them. That's more Vegapunk's camp. But maybe a really... Yeah, it was just Ame no Habakiri. Ame no Habakiri really did, nothing in this story. What did this sword accomplish? Nothing. Enma, on the other hand, Enma's the Chad... And Ame no Habakiri's the Kyle. Yeah. Chad Enma, Kyle Ame no Habakiri. Yeah. So, who knows? Unless, Momonosuke shows up in the final war or something. It's like, I finally can do something. Dragon with a sword. I don't know. Okay. So, anyway, that's the question revolving around the Smiles and Choppa. Moving on to another great question. They're all great questions this time around. And we're not going to get an SBS this good for a while. Who knows, though? Because now we're entering the final saga, and this is the first SBS since Wano ended, and then the flood of questions are coming in about Wano, obviously. So, maybe every SBS after this will be amazing. Who knows? So, next up is a question about the Straw Hats explaining their past adventures with the new members of the Straw Hat crew. So the question is when Frankie and Robin and Brooke and Jinbei joined, did the original members of the Straw Hat crew, did they bring them up to speed on everything that happened in the East? Did they talk about that kind of stuff? And Oda's answer was rather interesting. He's like, well, it depends on who it is, on who you ask, because when it comes to Luffy and Zoro, they don't really talk about their past all that much. When it comes to Nami and Sanji and Chopper, he says that they will answer the question if you ask them. If Frankie was curious about something that happened at the Baratier or something and asked Sanji about it, like, hey, I heard you were the cook on the Baratier, Sanji. What happened with that? Sanji would probably have no compunctions about telling Frankie about the events of the Baratier arc. He's like, oh yeah, I grew up there. Zeph was the chef and he helped me out. That's who I learned to cook from, and he's this really old geezer, but he's a good chef. And then one day Don Krieg showed up, and then Luffy was there and he beat him down. Mihawk showed up for a moment to cut down Zoro. That was really funny. And so, yeah, it was a crazy day, but that's what happened, right? So when it comes to, Sanji and Nami and Chopper, they'll talk about stuff if you ask them. And then Usopp, Oda said, will tell the stories even if you don't ask him, okay? So that's an interesting way that Oda worded that, though, because it's like Usopp will tell you if you don't ask him or if you do ask him, it doesn't matter. Sanji, Nami, and Chopper will answer if asked, and it seems to imply that Luffy and Zoro don't talk about it at all. So I'm curious, what would have happened, if, Robin went up to Luffy and asked, Luffy, can you tell me the story of how Usopp joined the crew? I don't know if Luffy would tell the story of Syrup Village, or if he would just look at Robin and just be like, oh, just ask Usopp, he'll tell you. Because maybe Luffy doesn't like to talk about the past very much, because he honestly really doesn't. Luffy has kind of a spotty memory, honestly. And then Zoro, it depends. If Sanji asked Zoro, that's not going to happen, all right? If Sanji's like, hey, Mosshead, what happened to your parents? He's like, screw you. Just they're not going to answer each other there. And you know what? I think it's also a general vibe. All of the Straw Hats kind of are a little bit of a motley crew. They kind of understand that they all sort of have rather traumatic backstories. They're not all orphans, but they're kind of all orphans, you know what I mean? Luffy's dad is alive, so he's technically not an orphan, but Dragon wasn't really around, Usopp has his dad still alive, but he's Yasopp, so you know what I mean? It's a rather, it's a lot of baggage, okay? And I think the other Straw Hats, when Jinbei joined, I think he could probably feel the room, and Oda even says that the adult members of the Straw Hats, which is rather interesting, the first 6 members of the Straw Hats were all late teens, early 20s when they joined. Luffy was 17, Usopp was 17, Nami was 18, Sanji was 19, Zoro was 19, Chopper was 15 when he joined. And then all the other members, the last few members we've gotten, Robin, Frankie, Brooke, and Jinbei were all adults, by comparison, okay, that they all met on the Grand Line, okay? So they're pretty good at detecting lies and stuff. So I feel like Jinbei is not going to pry. Jinbei's not going to be like, huh, hey, so Sanji, what happened with your dad? I don't think he's going to bring that up. Also, that's another thing, is it depends on who is asking who. Because if Zoro went up to Sanji, let's say pre-time skip, let's say during Alabasta. Let's say during Alabasta, Zoro went up to Sanji and asked Sanji about his parents. It's like, hey, swirly eyebrow, I was curious. What are your parents at? What are they doing for a living? Sanji's not going to say shit. He's just like, oh, screw you, Mosshead. I'm not talking about my parents. You met my dad. He's Zeph. He's that old geezer at the Baratier, basically. That's all he's going to say. He's not going to talk about Judge. He's not going to talk about Sora. He's not going to talk about his brothers. It's not going to happen. Now, if it was Nami asking Sanji about his past, that's a different story. If, let's say, I'm going to set the stage for you. You ready for this? Okay. So it's still, let's say, pre-time skip. Let's say the Straw Hats are sailing from Alabasta to Jaya. Okay. So they're on the Going Merry, sailing. Let's say it's like relatively late at night. It's like 10 o'clock or whatever. Sanji's in the kitchen. He's cleaning everything up, after the big dinner they had and everything. He's washing the dishes. He's, cleaning everything. And Nami comes in. Maybe she can't sleep or something. She's up late. And Sanji's like, oh, Nami-swan, do you like some coffee or some tea? And Nami's like, sure. And so they're just sitting there and just kind of chatting. And, at some point, if Nami asks Sanji, like, Sanji, where are your parents at? Do you ever meet your parents? Like, you don't really talk about that kind of stuff. Like, I know Zeph. Are you related to Zeph? Like, what's going on with that? And Sanji would probably say something like, well, Nami, I grew up in the north. My mom died when I was a kid. She's like, I'm sorry about that. And like, my mom died too. I'm like, yeah, my mom died. She was sick. And my dad, I don't really like to think of him as my dad. And if the conversation continued, it would probably be something along the lines of Sanji being like, I'll tell you, Nami, if you really want to know. I'll tell you the story, but I really don't want to. And then Nami would probably be like, yeah, you don't have to if you don't want to. But like, I think in that context, Sanji would talk about it. You know what I mean? So, and that's the same thing with a lot of the other Straw Hats, except for maybe Zoro and Luffy, because they're kind of off on their own and they don't really want to talk about their past, and that's fine. You know what I mean? It's cool. But it depends on who's asking who. But I love that question because it adds character development to the Straw Hats and like how they communicate and everything like that. It also reminds me of that episode. It was a filler episode in the anime when Brook joined. And I think they went to the library on the Sunny. And I think it was either Nami or Robin, probably Robin, that was keeping a log of their journey. Okay. And so, I think they told the stories to Brook about past adventures in the log. So there is a logbook on the Sunny that Robin and Nami and probably Frankie Usopp, they add to the log to like all these adventures and stuff. Most of the pages are probably just Usopp being like, and then that was our adventure on Little Garden where I defeated a giant and single-handedly cut a giant goldfish in half, and so they have to like, rip out those pages or like edit. It's like, this is all bullcrap. That didn't happen, so maybe stuff like that. But I love that question because it really addresses the camaraderie of the Straw Hats and how they're a family and, sometimes how they share things, but not always. Okay, so I like that one, okay? Now, getting to the good question about Pokemon in One Piece, all right? So, remember when Luffy went Gear 5th against Kaido, Kaido compared the actions of Gear 5th, which is like Toon Force, he compared it to an illustrated storybook, okay? Or like a picture book. It depends on the translation. And so people ask the question like, well, how does that work in One Piece? Like, does manga and like comic books, does that exist in the One Piece world? And Oda's like, well, yes and no. They don't have manga in the same way we have manga, where it's like speech bubbles. So the speech bubble concept does not exist in One Piece. There exists a thing called illustrated stories, where it's more of like, here's a picture, and then here's a paragraph explaining what's happening in the picture. Kind of similar to like silent movies. If you've ever seen silent movies, it'll be just like, Gadzooks, there's a piano about to fall. And then it shows the clip of like, oh no, the piano's falling. And then it goes back to, and then the piano hits. It's kind of like that, where it's a picture, a drawing of artwork, and then an illustrated, like, narrator box caption of what's happening. So they have that stuff. They have illustrated stories like that. And Oda goes on to give a few examples of the types of illustrated stories that exist in the One Piece world. So we already know about Sora, Knight of the Sea, which is basically world government and marine propaganda, but that's the common one that we already know about. We also a series called Fire Dog, which I can only assume is a parody of Fire Force, but it's a story about just a dog that's on fire. Yeah, I mean, what do you call a dog on fire? That's a hot dog right there. Hot dog. I could go for a hot dog. Oh, man. I could go for some, like, gourmet hot dog. Oh, yeah, look at that. Gourmet hot dogs right there. Look at those. What was I talking about again? All right, yeah, Fire Dog. Yes, I'd read Fire Dog. It seems like an interesting adventure. By the way, I typed in Fire Dog on Google, and the first thing I got was literally a dog working for the fire department. It was like a Dalmatian, like a fire dog. He's a good doggo. But, yeah, okay. Anyway, moving on. Now we have not Pokemon, but Pokeamon, okay? And it's a play off of Pocket. And Oda draws, like, little characters in the SBS, and there's, like, a little Pokemon-esque character that has a pocket. So it's like, and it's a play on Doraemon, because Doraemon is a character, is like a cat that has like a pocket, like an infinite space pocket. And so he's combining Doraemon and Pokemon to make Pokeamon, all right? So that's the version of Pokemon that exists in the One Piece world. That is canon, as well as Monkey Ball. Monkey Ball. Yep, it's Dragon Ball, or, you know, Artur has speculated it's maybe not a direct reference to the Dragon Ball. Well, it is definitely a reference to Dragon Ball, because that's one of Oda's, you know, Toriyama's, like, is like one of his inspirations of how, you know, One Piece came to be and everything like that. But in the context of the One Piece world, it might not be the story of, like, Goku and Frieza and Cell. It might be the story of, like, Journey to the West, which is what was inspired by what Toriyama took as a base to make Dragon Ball, okay? So it might be that, but of course we have Monkey Ball, you know, Monkey Ball, and then of course the sequel, Monkey Ball Z, which was very popular in the West especially. You know, remember that? Monkey, get the monkey, Monkey Ball Z! And I loved Monkey Ball Z. It was a really good one, all right? And then Monkey Ball GT, you know, like, I'll tell you, Monkey Ball GT, it had some cool ideas. You know, Super Monkey God 4, that was pretty cool. That was a fun form, yeah, sure, but, like, you know, overall, I just wasn't a fan of it. You know, it didn't really have a strong start, and, like, you know, the shadow monkeys that showed up at the end that all had the different monkey balls in them, that was neat, but overall, it didn't work out too well. Okay, so that's Monkey Ball. Now, you know, Monkey Ball Super is out now, and then Monkey Ball Heroes, and there's just a lot of Monkey Ball. The franchise is being really brought back to life. It just really makes me wonder, like, what are these series in the One Piece world? They're probably not a one-to-one, but I'm just curious. How many Pokemon exist in the One Piece world? You know, it's just crazy to me that, like, you know, Luffy could pick up the paper and, like, oh, what's happening in today's Pokemon chapter? You know, what's happening in today's Dragon Ball, Monkey Ball Super chapter? Oh, okay, so the god Beerus, you know, just like, I don't know how it is. But that's insane. And then the last one is a manga called Maruko-san. And Maruko-san is a play off of the manga Chibi Maruko-chan, which was written by Momoko Sakura, who was a very close friend to Oda. So Momoko Sakura was a mangaka that wrote this manga, or drew this manga, Chibi Maruko-chan, and she unfortunately passed away of breast cancer in 2018. And a very close friend to Oda, and Oda actually drew this really nice memorial to her, where her character, Maruko-chan, is there enjoying a meal with Luffy after she passed away. So that's a nice little touch that Oda added that to his manga now. So in the world of One Piece, there exists a manga that was drawn by his late friend. So that's a nice little touch that Oda did there. That's really good. Okay. So, just a couple more questions here that are still important. There is a question that I'm not going to go too much into, and that's about Sanji's eyebrows, just because most of the people in the fan base kind of already addressed that. So, during the events of the battle between Queen and Sanji, Sanji was developing the latent abilities of the raid suit, brought his modifications out, and his eyebrows switched directions, which were more similar to his brothers, like Yonji and everybody. And so he was worried that meant he was going to become like his brothers, and then his eyebrows switched back. So people were just mentioning that, but that was a pretty obvious thing. I mean, I didn't notice it the first time, but a lot of people did. And basically Oda explained that, like, when he put on that raid suit, the stealth black suit, it sort of awoke some latent physical alterations, but not anything personality-wise. So that's why his eyebrows, like, shifted very briefly when he awoke the powers, but then it's like, oh, wait a second, and then went back to being who he really was, okay? So that was something that everybody kind of already knew about, so that's probably the least interesting question out of all of this, but still, it's a really good question that Oda addressed, you know, so it's talking about Sanji and the raid suit and everything like that. The last question to bring up here was actually about Tensei, the design of Tensei. Who's Tensei? It's Kurouma. It's Black Horse, who is the vice admiral, who is the lead detective of the Marines that was talking to Kainu recently. So this character is based off of a Japanese actor, just like all of the admirals. In case you didn't know this, all the admirals are based off of famous Japanese actors from like the 60s and 70s in film, okay? And so in the case with Tensei, he is based off of the actor Kobayashi Akira, who is in a series called Battles Without Honor or Humanity. It's a series of 5 movies. It's a Yakuza film series that was very popular in the 1970s when Oda was growing up, so he loved these movies. And there was one scene in the movie where this actor, Kobayashi Akira, was having a dialogue with this other actor who was the basis for Akainu. I forget who Akainu's based off of right now. But those two actors on screen were having a scene together, and Oda just eats that shit up. He loves that like low-key dramatic scenes with these two actors, and so he incorporated that scene into One Piece when Tensei was having the talk with Akainu, Sakazuki, okay? And so there it is. Also, he brings up that it wasn't his intention, but every single one of the actors that he bases the admirals off of, and the admirals likewise, they all have black hair. Okay, and so Oda just realized this. Like, I didn't even intend that for Green Bull to have black hair, but it just ended up that way. So he gave Tensei like blonde hair for that reason. So the actor he's based off of has black hair, but Tensei himself has much lighter hair because Oda just kind of noted that little like thing. He's like, oh, I keep drawing these admirals with the same exact hair color. I'm gonna switch it up with Tensei. Tensei's not an admiral, but he has a code name. So I like to think his title was not like an official. Well, it is official Marine rank, but it wasn't like admiral or anything. It was lead of the detective force or like internal affairs or something. So I like to think it's a special section of the Marines, the detective corps or whatever, but it has a parallel rank that's probably on the same level as a vice admiral is what I'm assuming, because he has the code name with the color and the animal the same way that the admirals do, and the same way that like Momo Usagi does. Peach, rabbits, and then Chaton, brown pig, and then Kurouma, black horse. Okay, so they're probably like all vice admiral level, and if one of the admirals were to like defect or retire or die, then one of them would probably be in the running to become the next admiral. Okay, that's just how that goes. So yes, but I think that is all of the questions of note. So yeah, Zoro's family tree, Otama's family tree, the Straw Hats, character development between each other, illustrated stories that exist in One Piece, Monkey Ball Z, Chopper curing the smiles, Sanji's eyebrows, and Tensei being based off an actor from the 1970s. All of the questions that we want to know about. Woo! We did it! All right. So anyway, yeah, thanks again to Artur. Really, really handy, as always. Go check out his stuff, Library of Ohara, his Twitter, links and all that jazz is down below. Also, check out the One Piece Reddits, where all this stuff is compiled in a nice, like formatted way. That's always cool. No chapter this week, so it was actually the perfect time for the SBS to drop, so we can have this instead of the chapter. Also, the magazine. We have a new issue of the magazine. We got to see the designs for the Love fruit and the leopard fruit. So I'll talk about those in a separate video, and I might still elaborate on some of this, because like the stuff involving, Zoro's family tree, I mean, like you said, I can easily make a whole video about that. But anyway, yeah, this was a crazy one. I still got that done in less than an hour. Shocking. I thought this was going to take way longer than that, but this is a pretty solid SBS, and it's been a while. I think it was actually 4 months since the last volume instead of usually 3 we wait, so it was 4 for the last one. And yeah, thanks for watching, everybody. Teching 101, signing out. Later, everybody.